Okay, thank you all for joining today. And today we have Steve Taylor from Ortelius community, and I would like to welcome Steve to this meetup session. And we are really excited to know about Ortelius, the community itself, as well as Ortelius project, the open source microservices management platform, which you and your team is creating. So over to you, Steve. We are keenly looking forward for getting some knowledge around open source and what Ortelius is doing in this community.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll walk through. All right. So just to give you a little bit about the community, we are a relatively new community. We were adopted into the Continuous Delivery Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation, back in December. A few of our key people that are helping run the project. So just give you a background why Ortelius was started. One of the things that we saw was there's a new trends that are happening around microservices. And some of the things that we recognize is microservices require a new DevOps solution and a new view of how DevOps needs to be treated around microservices. And part of that is the emergence of a service catalog. So the concept of a microservice catalog is coming around. We've had catalogs in the past, but with the nature of microservices, this is going to really explode on that level. And also, we're seeing that there's some trends around continuous delivery, GitOps, experimentation, even MLOps is going to come into play over the next couple of years. Some of the big things that are driving this is the use of containers in production. Initially, if you look at a couple of years ago, even last year, the use of containers was not well adopted. People are very shy of containers, and what's happening is people are getting more comfortable with them. The tools around containers are allowing us to harden them, and because of that, we're actually seeing a lot of use at the container level. Now, most people, just even from last year, are getting more comfortable with Kubernetes in production. And that was actually up 78% from last year, which is a huge jump from a couple of years ago when Kubernetes was first coming out and people were looking at utilizing Kubernetes as a solution to write their applications in. One of the nice things that's happened in the last I would say in the last year, is Kubernetes has been able to scale. The last I checked was you can actually have over 5,000 nodes running in a single Kubernetes cluster. And that would support probably, depending on the type of containers that you're running, you could have up to about 15 to 20,000 containers running in your pods on top of those 5,000 nodes in production, which is a lot of containers that are running at once. And part of that, what is driving that high usage and the number of containers in your Kubernetes cluster is the concept of microservices. So microservices, is the concept of taking a function or a transaction and really zeroing it in on just a core piece of a transaction or a function. It does one little thing and it shouldn't do more than that. And because of that, we're going to have a lot of little transactions or little microservices that we need to keep track of. The Alexandria Noonan in SD Times back in 2019, they went through the journey of transforming their monolithic application into microservices. And what they realized was they could actually release an update to a library. And then when they would have one service that would use the new service, and now all the other services were using an older version, and they were trying to keep track of a way which service was using which version of the library. And because of that complexity that they ran into without having to a way to keep track of that, they actually ended up going backwards to a monolith as part of their process. Just because they didn't have the tools in place and the foresight to go ahead and see the benefits of having a service catalog to manage those relationships. And that's what one of the key things that Ortelius is going to be solving for your world. And like Randy Heffner said from Forrester, microservice development will fall apart without coherent discipline management. So we need to keep track of these moving pieces. One of the things that we've seen is just even the last 6 to 8 months, people have gone from 20 microservices all the way to now running hundreds to 200 microservices for an application. So if we take a step back and look at where we started, monolithic applications were, when we did our builds, we actually statically linked together all of the missing pieces. So we have, if you think in the Java world, we would create our WAR file or EAR file, and then we have all these jar files that we would have Maven dependencies, and we'd have Maven figure out what we needed to bring in for our WAR file to be distributable. And that all happened at the build step. Once we did we created our WAR file, we actually pushed it out to our artifact repo like Artifactory or Nexus. And that's where we delivered from there our single binary. So all of this dependency management was happening way back at the build time. So as a result of that, we had a place to store our artifact. We could drive a bill of material. We could figure out a difference report, what changed from the last build to the next build. And then we would take our binary and we could actually move that through our pipeline. So we can actually see what version is running in prod, what version was running in test, what version was running in dev. Because we had this big binary that we could keep track of, it was easy to visualize where things were at which stage of our pipeline. Now, as we think about taking that monolith and splitting it into smaller pieces, each microservice is, if you look at the concept of a microservice, it really is designed so that they're built and deployed independently. Most people are pushing their microservices into the Docker world. Doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. You could have serverless like Lambda functions, Cloud Foundry pieces. But the concept of having a small set of code that we're working on that we're going to bundle together. In our example here, we're going to use Docker and Kubernetes. We'll take that code that's being built and we'll push it out to our cluster. Now, if we take our application that has 100 transactions, our monolith, that means we're going to have 100 microservices typically. There usually is a one-to-one correspondence around that. Sometimes you may get a couple transactions per microservice. So you may have an object like a user profile that the microservice, you may have two microservices. One for the read, because we do reading of the profile more frequent. So we may want to scale the read transactions more than the update, create, and delete. transactions. So in that case, we may have two sets of microservices for the user object. Now, if you think about your database, how many database tables you have, you're going to double that to be the number of microservices that you'll typically have at that level, if not more. You have relational queries and those pieces. So when we start deploying these, we have a lot of microservices running in our cluster, and then we go ahead and repeat that again for development and testing. So if you think about if we have 100 microservices that are needed to run our application, and then we have three stages of our pipeline, we have potential to have 300 different versions of our microservices that we have to keep track of in our world. And what ends up happening in the microservices world is all the linking that we were doing back at the build stage in the monolith has been pushed over to the runtime environment. So it's a delayed linking. So we're actually linking at the API level, at the transaction level. So because of this, we have to make sure we have the right versions talking to of one microservice talking to the right version of another microservice at runtime. So because of that, we need to look at how one microservice is going to affect another microservice. We call that the blast radius. It's not only going to come into play with microservice to microservice transactions, but also microservice to the consuming front end, for example. So not all transactions are going to be service to service, but we'll have front end to the back end services relationships that we have to understand the blast radius. And also one of the key things in microservices that we look at is reusability. We want to write a microservice once and use it across all applications. So because of that, we're going to have multiple applications or front ends consuming our microservice. And because of that, if we make a change, a breaking change, we have to know how that's going to affect people. Also, we have to know in the world of microservices, there really isn't an application anymore. We have to think of applications as being logical. We have to look at the runtime linking instead of the compile time linking. So we really have to look at what is an application version, what makes up an application, what is the bill of material for an application, and how can we do a difference report at the microservice level. So we have to look at how we can solve that problem. And also, one of the things in the microservices world, we want to be able to do frequent updates, update a service multiple times a day. One of the things that we will see in the microservices world is 80% of our code base will become what I call static or slow changing. And then we have 15 to 20% of our code base or our microservices that are going to have more frequent changes. So we have to have that visibility into the different rates in which microservices are going to be updated. Also, we have to understand the microservice sprawl and make sure we handle reuse. And finally, the last two, how do we maintain our site integrity? And how do we achieve business agility through the world of microservices? So the solution to all those questions is what we came up with on the Ortelius side. Ortelius is a catalog for collecting all the relationships between the services and figuring out how they fit together and how they can play nice with each other. So one of the things that we want to do at the catalog level is really try to approach managing the configurations, the attributes, the relationships to support an airtight deployment and also airtight, what we would call runtime environment. We want to improve the confidence and eliminate the risks. We want to, be predictive about what's happening when we go to do a deployment of a service. Is this going to be a breaking change? Do we actually have to stop our automation, step back, and make sure that everybody, all the consuming application teams are on board? One of the things that we don't want to do that we are seeing people do is they're treating microservices as a monolith. So they're giving a namespace for an application to go into. They're taking every single service and putting it into that namespace. What ends up happening is we have another application. They get their own copy of the microservice. Now we have drift. We're back to treating microservices as a monolith instead of sharing reusable services, and that's a bad problem that we're recreating in the microservices world. Instead of fixing something, a shared service once, and having everybody automatically get that update without having a bug found. So application A finds the bug, application B hasn't run into it yet, but we can already be preemptive by when we fix the microservice for application A, and we roll that out, B is going to be fixed automatically. We don't have to redouble our work down the road. So to do that, we want to encourage reuse by domains and relationship and usage. This is called domain-driven design. You think of problem sets or solution sets on how services should be grouped together, who's going to manage them. We ran into a customer that they had 3 different teams, and each team wrote a single sign-on microservice, and they all were going out to the same website. So, the first team out was able to get their single sign-on adapted. Now, these 2 other teams had to, because it's single sign-on, you only get one of them, actually did all this work. They had to throw it away and then adopt the first team's single sign-on process, which is just a waste of time and resources. So being able to reuse your services across different domains, and the tricky part in that world is you have to cross business silos. You have to throw away the business silos and really look at the functionality that these services are providing. The other thing we need to do is restore what is our application. We need to create a logical view of our application. In the past, in the monolithic world, we had our WAR file. That was our application. We can actually go into it, see how it was put together, the dependencies. That's gone now in the microservices world. And Ortelius is going to replace that and give you the logical view back. And then one of the other things is we have to be proactive instead of reactive when we look at the visibility of our microservices. On the reactive side, we're looking at transaction logs that are happening in a single cluster. Ortelius is going to give you a proactive view of what an application's impact is going to be, what it looks like, the logical view before it gets applied to a cluster, and how is it going to roll across multiple stages. You're probably applying multiple clusters as part of that process. So how does Ortelius actually do all this work? One of the things that we do is we want to gather information when a new Docker image is created and it's pushed to the registry. At that point in time, we can actually link together information about the Git commit that triggered the workflow to run. We gather information about what was built. This is a container that was pushed to like the Quay registry or was pushed over to Docker Hub. We gather that information about where in the registry we can find it. One of the nice things with the registry is it's immutable. So we can get a SHA off of the image, and we can track that, so we can work our way backwards from production to the source code change that actually drove the whole CI/CD process. So we'll plug into your CI/CD tool. There's plugins into like Jenkins, TeamCity, Cloud Build for Google, any of the CI/CD tools. Circle CI, we have an orb for that. And we gather that information automatically. We want this to be hands off at that level. And then the next step that we have is the actual deployment. So after we gather information about the microservice being created, there's the next step of deploying it. Ortelius can either do the deployment. We actually use Helm under the covers to do the deployment, or we could use, if you already have like your deployment process baked into your Jenkins pipeline, we can record that Jenkins did the deployment in some fashion, or if it was Spinnaker that did the deployment, or Argo, we record that the deployment happened. What this allows us to do is build the relationships showing that this logical view of the application was delivered to this environment. That allows us to really build up a map of the changes that are coming through the pipeline and let us be proactive in the process. And because Ortelius is sitting above the cluster, we're at the 50,000 view looking across the whole organization. We can see that this version of this application made it to the dev environment. It was good there. We did some testing against it. Now the pipeline is taken to the next level. It's now in QA. QA ran their tests for a couple hours. Now it's good to go out to production. And we're looking at this from a logical view of the application, even though at each stage of the pipeline, we only may be changing 5 microservices out of our 100. We're tracking that across all the clusters as it evolves through the pipeline process. So as part of this process, we actually are utilizing the RESTful APIs that Ortelius provides in restoring these relationships in a Postgres database on the back end. They can get quite complex. You have a viewpoint from the developer, from like a microservice developer, who's consuming my microservice. So we have that viewpoint. From an application developer or front-end developer, which microservices am I consuming? From an ops perspective, I have this environment. What's in this environment? What are the versions of the microservices in the production environment across all the applications? So because of these relationships are bidirectional, we can basically take it from any point of view and give you the information that you're looking for. And this is just some examples of what we have from a bill of material report to the blast radius report, the difference report at that level. And this is how it fits into the pipeline process, kind of what I already talked about. You do your commit, you get a new container, Ortelius records that information, and then goes on to the next step. If we're going to do the deployment or somebody else is going to do the deployment, we record that, and then we just move through the whole process. And it doesn't really, like I said, it doesn't matter. The CI/CD tool will be fitting into that orchestration level of that process. And then we just keep on doing that as we go and take our logical view of our application and move it from development out to production. So what ends up happening is we reduce microservice sprawl by preventing copied code and preventing the same fix to be done multiple times for different application teams. We fix it once and let that be shared across multiple application teams to the domain-driven design. And just, the whole automation around keeping track of the microservices really gets minimized and breaks down the bottlenecks for getting something from the developers change out to production. And then also we give that, because it's a proactive view, we can really look at what's happening and how we're going to affect different environments as we move through the pipeline. And the whole goal is to enable microservice to move at a very high speed through the pipeline, and a high frequency. We don't want to have a slow process or a bottleneck in the way. If a test fails, that's good, but we can then kick that back around to the developer and they could fix it and move it again through the pipeline very quickly. So the goal of delivering high quality fixes and enhancements to production is one of the goals that we have and that we're able to achieve with Ortelius. So I'll jump back to this page and we'll take a quick look at what we have. Bring this up. So what we're looking at today is oops, typed in the wrong username, is the SaaS version that Deploy Hub is hosting. We are actually going to be focused on just the Ortelius portions of it. Deploy Hub is the downstream, one of the downstream projects from Ortelius. It uses about 80% of the code base of Ortelius. So the domain-driven design that we're talking about, if we dive into here, we can actually see at this level, maybe, let me try zooming in one. We have our store services domain, and this is where we can associate microservices that are related to our online store. And then we have our purchase processing domain here. And in our store services, we can break that down further into cart services and ads. On the purchase processing, we have a checkout service, payments, shipping, those type of pieces. So this is from a microservices developer perspective, this is their microservice catalog organization. And then on the consuming side, we have our hipster store. This is where we can actually set up our pipeline, represent that, where is our logical view of our application. So this is the consumer, this is the producer side of the world. Now, one of the things that we go from the domain-driven design is we could actually see how that fits into our application here. Get rid of some of this stuff. And if I can figure out how to get zoom out of the way, we can see where this fits in and at the application level. So taking a view from the consuming side, these are all the services that my application is going to be consuming. And I can pick and choose through the domain hierarchy here, which versions I want to be consuming. Oops, picked the wrong one on cart service. So in this case, there's two versions of the cart service, and my application is actually using version 149 here. The 50 is available, but for my base version of my application, I built it off of 149. And if you look at how the base version of our application was deployed, we can see that when we deployed it out to our cluster, that we ended up deploying every single service out here because this is the first time we deployed it. So we needed everything to go at that point of view. And again, this is just another map of the relationships of what we're consuming. If we go back to our next version, and we look at our components again, here we'll see at our cart service that we're actually consuming just 150. All the other services are the same. Like I said, this is where we get into iterative managing the changes. So in this case, the 15 to 20% of change is coming at the cart service level. Now, if we go back and look at how that one was deployed, we can see that when we deployed that, the only thing that changed was just the 150 version as part of that process. So these are the relationships that Ortelius is keeping track of. If we look at the component level, some of the things that we're doing with the Ortelius project. So if we actually look at the cart service 150, some of the information that we're gathering, again, this is the blast radius of how this service is being consumed. We're actually adding on, as part of our current service catalog project, is adding on additional information that we need to gather that's important to not only developers, but also SREs and like release engineers. So you can see here, we have some of the things, how it was built, or what was the CI orchestration tool, when it was built, where it was pushed to. This we use out to Quay, how it was tagged, the commit that triggered all this process, key value pairs that we want to associate with it. Some of the things that are currently in flight in the project are adding on to this service catalog data are information about what's the developer Slack channel, who's the owner of the project of this microservice, what's their phone number, what are the logs, or where are the logs kept for each environment for where this service is running. Also, we're looking into, because this is a container, we're looking into the contents of the container at the packages that were being used to build this microservice. This one, I believe, was under Python. So we're bringing in all the Python modules. We're going to have another box here that's going to show those associations, all the CVEs that are presented for that container, all the licenses that are being used at that level, PagerDuty links, those type of things. Last week we just looked at adding in the Swagger documentation and the link to run, do some test posts against the microservice through a Swagger UI portion. So that's kind of the stuff that we're adding through the open source project. And again, if you're interested, let me jump back there. Come on. Of course, let me go down to the information page so you can get to it. There it is. So if you're interested in the Ortelius project, we are a very fun group. We have people from all over the world that are contributing to the project. We have split it up between, we have a general working group meeting, an architecture meeting, and an outreach working group. The architecture meeting has been split into 2 time sessions, one for that corresponds to the States, North America-ish, South America time zone. And then we have another working group that's over in Australia for the Australia time zone as part of that process. We do have a track in the CDCon that's upcoming, the CDF track. There's going to be 4 sessions around Ortelius, so keep an eye out for that. If you are interested in joining, go ahead and submit a request to the Google Groups. This will give you access to all the documentation, meeting notes, the shared calendar, and then the main GitHub organization is off of the Ortelius, and then our Discord channel. That's an open invite for you. With that, I just take, if anybody has any questions, we could dive into that and we can go from there. So back to you, Garima.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I do have a question. And lately, I've been seeing that GitOps has picked up, and the discussion around GitOps is like, up in every community. So we would like to know if you have plans to integrate GitOps with Ortelius. Are you kind of putting it in the roadmap, and how it is looking like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So We've actually, the Australian architecture group is working on GitOps. They were very interested. It just happened to be a perfect timing where the folks over there were starting to look at like Argo CD for their companies, looking at FluxD, those type of solutions for their companies. So it was a perfect fit. So their goal for the Australian working group is to create a white paper around GitOps and how it's going to fit into Ortelius.
Excellent. And we look forward for that white paper. And this is an excellent session because although we do not have a large participation from the community today, but we will have this recording available on the YouTube channel, as well as I would like to call upon all the community members to join us at the Ortelius events, groups, and the kind of discussions you're having is very progressive, and thought process is kind of getting you to think about the next generation service delivery solutions, right? One more aspect is that we have an Ortelius event which is happening May 20th, and we would like to call upon the community to join us there. It's dedicated event for the microservices, and there's a lot of good discussions by the community, for the community, from the community. So if you would like to jumpstart your journey to open source, this is one of the best projects to kind of get into it from a first inception stages, first steps. And of course, I would also like to highlight that I'm also the program manager for the rewards and recognition community in Ortelius. So I am looking for more participation from the Canadian community towards Ortelius, and I would be steering more and more engagements in collaboration with Tracy and Steve to ensure that we build this collaboration in a bigger and a better manner. So of course, you will see a lot of events and a follow-up email from my side, which has a link to the survey also. So if in case you're interested to kind of be part of the survey and see how microservices are kind of developing into a next generation landscape, this is your opportunity to take part in that as well. So hopefully that all makes sense, and we can collect our thought processes together, and we can make this community even bigger and broader.
Yeah,
Lastly, I would like to thank Tracy, who is there on the call. I see her. And Steve, you for this excellent session. I couldn't have asked for more.
no problem. And one thing on the community, we welcome any level of participation. You don't have to be somebody that's a coder. You don't have to be ever contributed to open source. We have a lot of people that love to help people get started. Even if you've never worked with Git or GitHub or anything like that, we go through and help bring you into the community at the right pace. So don't be afraid of the open source. I know it's a big step for people, but at the Ortelius group community, we like to embrace everybody. So please come. We'll find a place for you, and we'll work with you and build up your skill set.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thank you for being so welcoming. I had done my first contributions through this project, so I'm really grateful that this project is there to support us. And just to highlight that, not only the contribution, that's another opportunity you can actually have through this project. And we welcome all the users as well. If you want to try and test and give us feedback, that's another thing which you can do. So with that, I think we would like to conclude this session. We will invite Steve and Tracy you again sometime soon to outline what the survey had to tell us, right? So I'm looking forward for the May 20th event and the results of the survey. So again, thank you very much, and we'll follow up with an email.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, Steve, Tracy, Rima.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.